Hello and welcome to Stories on Facilitating Software Design and Architecture. Today we're here with our guest, Paul, who will introduce himself in a minute. We're also here with our normal crew, which is, of course, Kenny, Andrew, and myself, Andrea. So, Paul, how about a little intro about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I've been a developer most of my career and consultant more recently over the last decade and a half, mostly specializing in domain-driven design and event storming. So I do training and facilitation in those things. And then I'm also probably more known in the United States for starting the Explore DDD conference, which runs in Denver every year. And I give talks at conferences, and we're here in Melbourne at just having wound up AdaConf and taught an event storming workshop together yesterday.
Yep, which was really fun. It was really nice to work with you in running this workshop. Thank you for
likewise.
working together. So today, Paul is going to share a story with us. So what's your story?
Yeah, well, I was talking about this a bit with Kenny, and I think a good war story is maybe one that we could lead off with. So I was a kind of architect tech lead on a project that this was, I guess, late 2000s. And I'd been working with a team. I was based in Colorado, where I am now, and we had developers in Chicago and also in Buenos Aires. And we were working on a very complicated system. It was the first system where I'd actually tried to apply domain-driven design and test-driven development, and a lot of these kinds of techniques. And I thought it would be a good idea to get all the development team on a call and pick some code and kind of talk through how to refactor code and how to improve it and make it more expressive of the domain concepts. So we did that. We got everyone on a call, and me as the tech lead, walked through. I'd picked some code and just sort of started doing extract method refactorings and showing how to do a bit of test-driven development. And not long after that call, one of the developers quit. And I didn't know what I'd done, but it should be pretty obvious what I'd actually done. Is one of the contractors in our team in Chicago, it was actually the code that he'd written, and he felt very embarrassed and shamed by what I'd done because it kind of implied to the rest of the team that the code that he'd been involved in was not up to par.
Mm.
And so I reached out to him and apologized, and then apologized to the rest of the team. And fortunately, he unquit and came back, and was he had been a key team member and continued to be a core team member. And I remember at the time thinking I was doing everything with the right intentions and the right motives, but I just had a complete lack of understanding, I think, of how that would be perceived by the person that had done that, and how my misuse of my power and authority would actually cause someone a lot of embarrassment and shame, even though it was unintentional. So, it was a real wake-up call for me about respect and being aware of other people and the power that I wield, and also how to go about ch changing hearts and minds, and coming alongside people to try to show different ways of doing things instead of, you know, taking an approach like I did, which was clearly not a good way to go. So that's my war story. And I learned a lot from that. And that doesn't mean I haven't made mistakes since, but
Yeah,
that was one of my bigger ones.
I think it's awesome that you're talking about not just the practice, and I think it's clear to see for us here the not just like the intention, but also you're bringing to the fore something that I think it's a lot to do with decentralization, which is understanding the power and power dynamics in an organization, and how important they are, how impactful they are um, when you have more, especially the more authority you have, the more careful you need to be about uh,
Yeah.
that effect, and also why it's good to decentralize that so that these things are less damaging to a certain degree. So I guess that's the question. Do you think in a more autonomous teams, like in teams that work in a more autonomous way, do you think this would have been different if they had more kind of not just freedom to do what they need to do, but also more responsibility for the actions that they take?
That's a good question. It's hard to say. I haven't really thought through an answer to that. I haven't been asked that question before in terms of decentralization and autonomy. When I look back over it, I mean, I had a lack of empathy. I did not take the time to think, how would I feel if somebody did this to me? And I don't know that if the team had been, I mean, the team was fairly autonomous and power was fairly decentralized. And I thought of myself as like one of the peers, but there's other dynamics that were in play. I was an employee, he was a contractor,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And that adds another complication to it. And then I don't know. I've been in situations that were decentralized where there was still a lack of empathy and people said things that they didn't really think through. So maybe the blast radius is less,
Mm, yes.
but I don't. Yeah. I wish I had a better answer.
And I think it's
It's a good
good. It's
question.
Yeah.
this area.
I have a thought there. So you say lack of empathy, and I think I struggle a little bit with that. I agree with with that, but you can never have enough empathy. So it's very hard if you work with different cultures, if you work with different people. Like you say, I wasn't aware of it, but if you look back at their experience, was there any point that that person signaled in a way they didn't agree, right? Because it's two-way. On one hand, I hear you were dominant blind, right? You were blind to your rank. On the other hand, I always ask myself a question when that happens to me: is that were there some signs or something that you can think back of, like that person didn't
You mean
act on?
indications that, yeah, ahead of time, I think I was just oblivious to the dynamics in terms of employee and contractor and you know, I wasn't really his boss necessarily, but kind of a certain seniority on the team. And then I think related to that, just a lack of understanding of how to get people to change. Um, I at least was trying to show rather than tell, but it wasn't done in a way that would actually have led to that. I mean, it came up in today's hands-on session this afternoon of I'm teaching the same techniques today that I was trying to get across all those years ago. And the same questions come up from people like how, my team is reluctant. They wouldn't understand the value of this. How do I convince them? And I told the same story. I'm like, well, don't do this. Right.
Well, at least it's a story you got a lot out of. As in, it would be sad if that had happened and you would have not learned anything from it.
Right.
So I think the fact that not only you learn from it, but you're willing to share it shows like a good thing.
Yeah,
Multiple, not just learning and sharing, so
yeah,
other people learn too.
and I think about the empathy, that's why I'm saying it. Even though you learned, I had that many times happening to me, and it still happens, right? And I think the important part, what I hear from you, is that you didn't step into your cognitive dissonance of, yeah, but I had the right intention. And
Right.
I think that was a big learning point for me as well. I'm not sure for you as well. I tried to have the right intention because that's what usually happens when people step up to the plate. They're also propagated then in a way. And you'll make mistakes, but then you can do two things, right? You can say, well, but you wanted this, right? So you can go that route, or you can go to the route of, okay, how can we improve this? There's a very tricky slope from, let's say you're in a team coding and it's rather exact, right? Coding is rather exact. There's a solutions. And then you step up to that plate of technical leading something. And then there's all this flakiness going on there because people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I, uh, yeah, I'm really not sure. I think that, I mean, this was a while ago, so I don't remember my initial reaction, but certainly I expect that my initial reaction would have been, well, I had the right intentions, but then doesn't, at the end of the day, the other person responded the way they did, and now I need to, and whether or not they overreacted is another question. But I think it certainly got my attention. And then, I was working hard to make it right. And I think that's a pattern that I try to do. It's like, okay, I'm going to make mistakes. And if you are in leadership, you're going to make mistakes. You're going, you're going to do things that people are going to misinterpret, or you might do the wrong thing with the right intentions. I mean, these things happen. And I think part of it then is, well, how do we fix things when we do make mistakes? And how do we prioritize those relationships and go about really reconciling and so actually giving a proper apology instead of just, I'm sorry you feel bad, but actually like, no, I was wrong, I did the wrong thing, not I'm sorry you feel that way, right? And then actually thinking about, okay, well, how wide is the blast radius of this
Also,
socially, and it's the whole team, so I need to apologize to the whole team, not just to this one person, right?
yes, obviously this person quit, but other people might have also,
Everyone else was there,
yeah,
so
Yeah.
they might have felt some.
But what I'm mostly curious about is you went in, get into a solution mode, right? So you say, well, let's do this. So that got that person embarrassed. You solved that on an emotional level, but was it solved on, because it can still form tension if that person still didn't agree with the approach you took. Was it that they also didn't agree on the approach you took? Because that can be another level of messiness, right? Because if now you reconciled, but you still go your way, that can end up with sort of like, even though your way might be the least worst solution, I always say, right? It can how did you cope with that? Did you get his ideas in, or how did you get him to go along? And
so honestly, it was so long ago, I can't remember now. Like to think I said, so what do you think? And all of that, but I don't remember. That would be more my preferred approach now, is to solicit advice, and if you really want people to change, you have to meet them where they're at, and kind of and really hear their concerns. And so I would try to do that more these days. If someone's pushing back, then why are they pushing back? And there's a great article by Dale Emery, Resistance as a Resource, where he elaborates why people resist change. And so being able to identify what is the resistance. Is it somebody is feeling threatened? Is it somebody doesn't understand? Is it, any one of these number of reasons that somebody might be pushing back? That article does a great job of explaining that that's actually a signal that you should understand and explore as a way of moving forward, rather than just detecting the pushback and then pushing back harder.
I've heard a Dutch anthropologist say resistance is just someone else's opinion.
Yeah, I think so.
There's one thing I was wondering about, Paul, because this one of the things that interests me a lot about software is fundamentally, like we have all these mental models, and then we are understanding of what the problem is, and then we turn that into code. And at an architectural level, that's kind of easier because there's less, in the current ways of doing architecture, there are less people at the top who are doing architecture, right? And then they kind of do their work and they pass it down, like with the stress on the word down, to like the development teams, and they kind of just do it. But they don't just do it, right? They have their mental models. They have, this person had their ideas of this code that they'd created, right? And they obviously, what they had in their head probably largely reflected what they did. And there were probably other people who did other bits. I think it's because one of the parts of architecture is kind of trying to come to the shared mental model. But as you've been saying, challenging people's code is one thing, but challenging their mental models that turned into the code is another thing. And then kind of trying to facilitate that thing, that's a big, especially if you're emotionally related to your code, right? Like, I thought really hard about this, and this is my best solution to this problem. And then you're like, here's a different way, or even maybe not a different way, maybe even a worse way, but a way that we more all commonly understand, in which DDD is a great way for getting to that kind of stuff. Do you think, like, how much do you think you were challenging this person's, again, maybe it's quite a long time ago, but like when you see this, because I've seen this in the past, how much do you think you're fundamentally challenging this person's, maybe not worldview, but their understanding of the problem and all of the work that they've done to try and get to this? Because I see this a lot, right? It's very easy to do architectures And the less you engage with the people who are going to build it, the better, because they're not going to push back on you. But what you really want to do is collaborate with them and get all of that pushback, and then get it into the code and get that pushback and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think of the 5 dysfunctions of a team and the idea that just going for consensus, and really people are saying yes when they mean no.
Or silence when they mean like, oh my God.
Right. And I think that's part of what you're describing. And I think it's much better now to hear people's concerns, to validate their concerns. The real collaborative aspect of modeling is, Eric Evans would always talk about, like, model it 3 different ways. And that's something I try and emphasize in when I teach domain-driven design is, okay, you come up with an idea, so try to look at it 3 different ways. Or if you have disagreement between 2 people over 2 different approaches, then at least come up with 3 different options on the table, because then it's not, me versus Kenny, right? In terms of his approach or my approach, or me versus you. Now we've got options on the table that we can consider. And I've actually found that to be a really good diffuser of these types of things, because then event storming is like that as well. Like we were talking yesterday, there's something about externalizing those internal mental models onto sticky notes, and then being able to stand up together at a wall and
looking at a very
looking
concrete
at something and pointing at something and saying, well, what about this? And what about that? And what if we rearranged it this way? Or
But this is it, right? Like, it is, like Andrea said, it's like, this is, I think, the genius of EventStorm. One of the geniuses. It is concrete because it's on a sticky note on a wall, but it's written in someone's handwriting, and you might have 3 things that are similar and it's different types of handwriting, and it's sticky notes so you can like move them around. And I think it confronts that head on, right? Like, this is what we think. Oh, we all think different things, and like
There's also
like,
there's also a meta to event storming, so which I've seen, right? Because event storming also propagates that you're doing it in one way, which maybe someone isn't able to express it in an event storming, but with a domain storytelling, right? So I once was at a conference with 3 facilitators in one group, and we all each used our own tool, but it worked in the end because what you're saying, Paul, it wasn't about the approach. It's about, we can interact with the model, with each other's models in their way. And I've seen that happen often on the meta level as well, that we say, no, we really need to do this in an event storming way. Well, but what I want to do, okay, let's go on. As long as you visualize it
Yeah, one of the best things I ever heard was, I remember years ago teaching a DDD class in Paris around the time of DDD Europe, and one of the attendees said, this event storming thing, I mean, it's good, but I much prefer domain storytelling. And I'm like, great.
Yeah, you're collaborating.
Yeah.
Work for you.
But I think that there's a really valid thing. But at the same time, it's like knowing both. And at some point, maybe they prefer that. And at some point, they might go, you know what? I prefer domain storytelling, but for this group, event storming is going to work really well. Because I also have preference to swap over time, right?
So my wife has a background in anthropology, and about this thing, right, where you meet someone of where they are. And she told me from a cultural perspective, and that really settled with me, right? People are okay with changing as long as it's a differentiator of themselves or a differentiator of their model. But if you really change the model, that's not acceptable. So you want to meet them here instead of what you're saying. And that really stood by me, right? People can, if they aren't really doing something with UML, okay, let's start doing UML, but then collaboratively in another way, because, well, that's what they're already doing. So let's do more of it.
I have a slightly different mental model when it comes to that. And that mental model is that people will be okay with certain level of change as long as you don't attack their core beliefs. And obviously, nobody has their core beliefs printed on a nice, handy list on their forehead or their arm, unfortunately. But this person might have been, my core belief is that I hate testing or not, who knows, or I love this pattern and this language. And by doing that, touched on, or you said something that touched on their core beliefs. And I think I like to think of Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolution, and this is the person that thought of paradigm shifts. You talked about how people changing, and for someone to change, they need to change some aspect of their core beliefs. Some of them are really close to being alive, and other ones are like professional life, emotional life, and they have less or more levels of depth. But I think when you talk on one of those. They need to do the work of wanting to want that belief to change, and they do that movement from I don't like insert. Let's say this person didn't like testing. I'm completely making it up. So let's say they were like testing. I don't like it because reason, but they saw it and this really annoys them. And in fact, really being annoyed by it might have been the reason why it was okay and they learned about testing, etc. So this might have been a tipping point on being ready to change their core belief. Or maybe it was like, I think everyone that does testing is horrible, and turns out that you were really nice to him. And that is like, oh, actually, that's not true anymore. So I need to reevaluate that core belief and move it. So this core belief idea is kind of what helped me model this behavior in some ways. Like, well, if I was really attached to this idea and it was part of who I am, which is similar to what you're saying, isn't it, Kenny? How do you move forward on something that is nearly your identity?
Yeah, it's a different model, which I agree with.
Yeah, so it might be useful to other people to have it.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me. There's a talk. I think it's not my most famous blue sky skeet. I think that's what they're called, which isn't very famous, but it's been like retweeted a lot. It's just me quoting Heen. I'm going to say that wrong. Apologies.
No,
Heen. But Heen did a talk about decision making at Newcraft in Paris last week, I think. And it was basically like the thing we should spend the most time on is the context. It's not the solution. It's not the options. It's like, where do we all start and where does the problem start? And we don't, because we're like, let's fix it. And like, but spending time, and it like judging by the number of people who've reshared that, people are like, yes. And it's true. Like I don't do it. I'm like, let's get past this boring context.
Let's solve it.
Where we actually are right now. And like, let's forget understanding the problem because that's probably less exciting. Let's figure out how to solve it. And
Actually.
yeah.
Do you have any closing thoughts or something you want to share with us to kind of take it away?
Well, I'm just grateful to be here, grateful to do the workshop with you, and thanks to both of you for taking the time to talk today. This is really great.
Well, thank you so much for coming, and super good to do the workshop together. Great to see you too as well, and see you next time.